And if you're in pain and sorrow and grief and your soul is troubled today, we have the answer. And His name is Jesus. And Jesus is the one who can deal with all those pains and sorrows that we have. We sometimes ask the question, why? As a matter of fact, we're going to look at that today as we look at Jesus, the sight giver. We're trying to look into the life of Jesus. Take a look at Jesus afresh and fall in love with Him all over again. We've seen Jesus in the past weeks as He's at the Feast of Tabernacles. And now He's out, He's about. In John chapter 9, verses 1 through 12, we begin an episode dealing with Jesus giving sight to the blind. Let's read this passage together in respect for God's Word. Let's stand. Together. Now as Jesus passed by, He saw a man who was blind from birth. And His disciples asked Him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of Him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When He had said these things, He spat on the ground and made clay with the slava. And He anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And He said, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. And he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, Is not this he who sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. He said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, How were your eyes opened? He answered and said, A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received sight. Then they said to him, Where is he? He said, I do not know. The Lord add His blessing to the reading of His Word. You may be seated. Many of you probably remember the name Robert Louis Stevenson. He wrote Kidnapped, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and a lot of other books that are very popular and that sort of thing. He grew up in England, and when he was a youngster in Edinburgh, Scotland, he was fascinated by the lightmen. In those days they had gas lights, and they'd have a guy come around every night lighting them. And his parents overheard him say when he was yet just a young lad, watching the lightmen come around, he says, Look, there's a man out there punching holes in the darkness. He just described the life of Jesus Christ. Because Jesus came as a light in the midst of darkness. And He spent His days punching holes in darkness and helping those who were blind, who had no light, to see. In this story that is before us today, a blind man is healed. It's very, very interesting how the sequence of Scripture falls. Remember, we've been at the Feast of Tabernacles. Feast of Tabernacles may be September. And we know in chapter 10 we have the Feast of Dedication. And that's generally December. So sometime between September and December, Jesus is again in Jerusalem. And The story that John picks at this point to tell about Jesus is he's healing the blind. Now, this is the 6th of 7 miracle signs that Jesus has done. And each one is selected with purpose and intent. John didn't try to cover all of them. There was purpose behind it. He had just declared himself to be the great I am, and before that, the light of the world. And what did the Jewish leadership do when they saw the light of the world? They didn't see the light of the world. Did you catch that? They were blind. So what's the very next thing that Jesus, the I am, the light of the world, does? He proves he is the I am, the creator and the light of the world, by giving sight to the blind. Wow. Do you see the flow that's happening here? You know, what we're looking at today, as we see it, is this story that answers so many questions that we have. And you're going to see 3 themes that recur throughout this passage. The first of these is, why does suffering occur? Why are babies born deformed? Why does a good, godly Christian break their neck in a trampoline accident and be paralyzed? Why does someone who is living for the Lord and working greatly, and suddenly they're in the hospital? And it answers the question. A second thing that you see throughout this is, who is really blind? What is blindness? You know, blindness is the ability not to see, right? Well, Jesus isn't talking about physical throughout this. John isn't either. What he's talking about is spiritual blindness. Can you see God? How do you know? How do you know you're blind? And the last thing that you'll see is, where's the light? Where does light come from? We already know the answer. Jesus. We're going to see this throughout the text today. Let's start with the first question, really. That's sin and sickness. What is the relationship between sin and sickness? This is verses 1 and 3 through 3. It starts out with the blind person. And the one thing we have to understand, in Jewish culture, for some reason, they were very sensitive to blind people. And giving alms to blind people resulted in a special blessing for you if you gave to a blind person. Why it was better than a crippled person, I don't know. But they had a very sensitive spot for those who were blind. They passed this man who had been blind from birth, and they asked this stupid question. They asked this question. Who sinned? This man or his parents that he should be blind? That's the dumbest question I've ever heard. How could he have sinned before he was born? Now, I understand biblically original sin, and that sin is the cause of all illness and sickness and everything. When Adam sinned, it plunged us, and every person is born in sin. David said in Psalm, I was conceived in sin. But how did he in the womb commit some sin that God says, that's enough, kid. Pow! I'm going to make you blind. That's dumb. Oh, maybe it was his parents. And really, did his parents sin? And God said, oh, because you sinned, I'm going to smite this kid. Really? You go up and you smack God, and God says, okay, I'm going to take out him. Who does God deal with? He deals with the individual. He doesn't smite my kids because of my sin. He deals with the individual. So theologically, this is a stupid question. It's the same question that each of us ask. Every one of us asks the same thing. Something bad happens to us. Immediately we say, what did I do, God, to deserve this from you? Isn't that the truth? Anybody else ever ask that of God? Don't look at me with those pious faces. I know every one of us does. We blame everything that happens on sin. And sin is. But does that mean that God's going to smite us, smack us, step on us, spank us every time we do something? And He's going to get us back through someone else? The disciples were not operating, I think, in the good realm of the Spirit. They saw this person not as an opportunity to show mercy and help. They saw it as an opportunity to discuss theology. Let's ask the profound questions. As opposed to doing what? Meeting a person where they are in their needs and helping them. Jesus answered them, wrong! Neither. It wasn't the parents. It wasn't the child. God did this. And we go, ooh, don't like that answer. Do you know why God did it? That He might be glorified. That He might be glorified. You see, when we see hardships and obstacles and things happen in our life, we always blame it on sin, ours or someone else's. We never realize that God can actually do things with purpose and intent so that He might be glorified in the end. You know, we think glorifying God is winning the Super Bowl and running up to the microphone and saying, praise Jesus. Oh, that's glorifying God. That's the easiest thing in the world to do. When you're on top and things are good. Do you know when glorifying God really comes out? When you're at the bottom. And you're in the midst of hardship and trials and circumstances and situations that it seems so hopeless. And yet you turn to God and say, God, this is up to you. And we trust you. God leads us into difficulties. Sometimes He gives us difficulties for one purpose, to glorify Himself so that He Himself can be lifted up. Why does God allow children to be born deformed? Why does God allow accidents to occur? Why does He allow a young girl who's 16 years old to dive into a pool of water only to break her neck and be a paralytic for the rest of her life? Why such tragedy? So He can be glorified through people like Joni Eareckson and Tata. Even though a paraplegic has done what? Been able to glorify God. I can't say God caused that. I can say God used that. He uses everything that occurs, the good, the bad, to bring glory to His name. And that's where Romans 8:28 should be just a foundational stone in our life. God works everything out for good. Can I change the word just for illustrative purposes? For His glory. He works everything out for His glory. Good. I didn't say every circumstance in life is good. But I said God is going to turn it into His glory. And the things that we gripe and complain about, those are the very things that God wants to use. Then Jesus in verses 4 and 5 talks about the light and the night. He says, I must do the work of the Father while it is still day. Put yourself in first century AD. How much industry occurred at night? I'll give you a hint. Why? There was no light. They didn't have all these different things that we have today. It wasn't until you had light that you could work. And so you could only work when it was light. Now, in the process, he's talking about himself. You understand this? He is the light. He warns about darkness. You know what darkness is? It's separation from light. That's all it is. Darkness is nothing. Do you know that? Darkness is not something you create, it's the absence of light. You take away light, and darkness comes. And Jesus says, the night is coming. Do you know what I personally think that refers to? The fact that he was leaving, and what is left in the absence of light? Darkness. Night. No revelation whatsoever. And he again points to himself. And he says, I am the light. As I get older, one of the things that I notice, I need more light to see. I find the brightest light I can to shine on something so that I could see it better. Now, when I was young, I didn't need light. I could read anything in darkness. Now, if I don't have this huge million kilowatt powered flashlight or something, I can't see anything. You know, and what Jesus is saying, I am that source of light. I am that which reveals. And he's pointing this out, that he is the light. He's the light giver. And he proves it by taking a person who has absolutely no sight, never saw a thing in his life, born blind, and he can see. Wouldn't that be marvelous? Can you imagine that? Not seeing. And suddenly you can see. I was playing softball one time, got hit in the eye with the softball. It knocked out vision in my eye. They took me to the hospital. I was hospitalized, trauma, and all this other stuff. And they had me blindfolded. I didn't like that. It was dark. I like light. Jesus is the one who heals and gives light. Now, when he healed them, he didn't do it the way the Pharisees liked, the Jewish leaders. The healing and ritual were actually against the religious norms. Jesus had a tendency to do that. He healed on the Sabbath. You see in the book of John, he did that several different times. Why did he do that? To show that he was Lord of the Sabbath and he didn't follow all their religious rules. You know, it's interesting. 3 of the things that they said were sin are things that Jesus did. 1, they taught you could not spit on the ground on the Sabbath. Now, you could spit on a rock, but you couldn't spit on the ground. Because if you spit on the ground, that's making mud and that's work. Now, I'm serious about this, guys. This is real. Additionally, you couldn't heal on the Sabbath. This is part of their rules. If you saw someone with a broken leg, you could make them comfortable, but you couldn't make them better. Because you were forbidden to do any work on the Sabbath, and if you made them better, you had to work to do it. The third thing, he used spit. Can you say that in church? I just did. Spit was medicine. And if you use medicine on the Sabbath, that's work. And you can't work. So all of you who have your medicine little bottles out that have Sunday on it, and you pull it open and you take it. I worked this morning. Okay, I took my medicine. You're not supposed to do that under the rabbinic tradition. Additionally, shifting gears a little bit, look at the fact that he made clay. What is the meaning of clay? Why would he make clay or mud, whatever term you want? I see two pictures in this myself, two things that fascinate me. When God made man, how did he do it? He took dust and formed man. What is he picturing? The great I am. I am the Creator. Additionally, I think there's something else. How many times have we read in Jeremiah and other places, I am the potter and you are the clay? I mean, those are two great pictures that I think Jesus is showing in what he's doing in this. That he is what? The Creator, the Master, the Lord, who can do anything that he wants. And so what does he do? He uses the slava in the clay to demonstrate that he is the sovereign God, able to do anything. Well, this led to a whole bunch of questions, guys. I mean, here's a guy who's blind. Jesus has put mud on his eyes and says, go wash. By the way, doesn't it take faith to do what Jesus said? Go wash in the pool of Siloam? He had never seen Jesus. All he heard was, hi, this is Jesus. I'm putting mud on you. Go wash and you'll be able to see. And he went, and when he washed, still not having seen Jesus, he saw. And so people began to question. He didn't go back to Jesus. You know where he went? Home. I mean, wouldn't you do that? I mean, you go tell your parents. And so he headed back to his neighborhood, and his neighbors went, who is this guy? It looks like the blind guy. I mean, he kind of sounds like the blind guy, but he can't be the blind guy because he ain't blind. And so others said, yeah, this is, wow. And so they got into questions, says, how'd this all happen? Application, just out of nowhere. When Jesus changes you, people notice. Did you catch that? People notice. Some aren't going to believe you. Like some of the neighbors, this can't be you. But there's always change. And it's evident. Oh, that was application. Sorry, shouldn't have gone there. Who was this? And so the man tells his story. Everybody that Jesus touches has a story. He didn't know much about Jesus. All I know is this Jesus guy came and healed me. What's your story? If you don't have a story, you don't know Jesus. It doesn't have to be a flashy story of motorcycles and robberies, and it doesn't have to be that. But there's got to be something. What has Jesus done to you? How are you different because of it? Every Christian must have a story, and it's a story they must be willing to share. When people say, what's different about you? You got to be able to say, oh, I know. It's what Jesus has done to me. And point it back to Jesus, and that's exactly what he did. Well, that leads me to our application. How's my life going to be different today? How do I become a better disciple of Jesus Christ? How do I fall in love with Jesus all over again? 3 things I want to talk about today, just briefly. The first is spiritual blindness today. You all understand we are born blind, just like this man. I'm not talking about physically. I'm talking about spiritual blindness. The world about us is blind. Why do the people do the crazy things that they do? They're blind. They're stupid. They're ignorant. Whatever term you want to use, it's a reflection of spiritual blindness. They can't see. We get so mad at them. Me, I don't know about you, but I get so mad. But who am I to get mad at them because I was there once myself? The reason that it makes me mad now is I can see. But how do you tell a blind man that they're blind? I'm not blind. I can see. They can see physically like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious leaders. Yeah, they had physical sight. They just had no spiritual sight. They couldn't recognize God in front of their nose. Jesus stood there. Are we any different? You know, I tend to think that we aren't. I understand those who don't believe. And I understand the reason they do the things they do. They're blind. The God of this age has blinded them. That's exactly what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 4. They can't see. They feel no guilt because they don't see the consequences. They don't understand. That shouldn't provoke anger in me. It should promote pity. We should have great pity for the unbelieving world because they're blind. They can't see. We should be praying, God, have mercy on them because they're blind. And God, be merciful to me because I don't always see with your eyes either. Blindness is all about us. I think there's a second thing. The thing I really learned from this man is being a witness for Jesus. He was a witness. You know what a witness is? You've ever watched television or been to court of law? And there's these things called attorneys. You ever heard of those things? And then there's, what do attorneys do? They sit around and argue. That's what they do. And in a criminal trial, what you want is a witness. What does a witness do? A witness tells what he has seen and heard. In criminal trials, especially big criminal trials where there's mafia and all this, people don't want to testify. Why? Because being a witness will bring potential negative results in your life. That's why they have witness protection programs. I was talking with Skip Gray here recently. Many of you know Skip. He says, Ron, I've been thinking about the church. Okay, Skip. He says, we are just like a courthouse. He says, the church is filled with 2 types of people, lawyers and witnesses. He says, everyone wants to be a lawyer. They are willing to argue about anything. Nobody wants to be a witness. Because being a witness, you have to tell what you see and hear, and you might catch flack. And I went, whoa. I'm going to ask you a simple question. Are you an attorney or are you a witness? God did not call you to be an attorney. He called you to be a witness of Jesus Christ, to tell everyone what you have seen and heard about Him. Final point. Everything is for God's glory. All that happens to you in life is for God's glory. We're looking at a blind man, a man blind from birth. I know someone else who was blind almost from birth. Her name was Frances Jane Crosby. You probably know her as Fanny Crosby. Wrote over 9,000 hymns. She wrote so many hymns that in her day she had to use pseudonyms, or an entire hymnal would contain only her songs. She was blinded at 6 weeks old. So she never remembered seeing anything. A pastor came up to her one time and said, I think it is a great pity that the Master did not give you sight when He showered you with so many other gifts. She replied, do you know that if at birth I had been able to make one petition, it would have been that I was born blind? Because when I get to heaven, the first face I will ever see is Jesus. She wasn't concerned about her blindness. That wasn't the issue. And she had it all her life. When she was 8 years old, she wrote this. Oh, what a happy soul I am, though I cannot see. I am resolved that in this world, contented I will be. How many blessings I enjoy that others people don't. To weep and sigh because I'm blind, I cannot and I won't. Why do bad things happen to you? Is it because you sinned? Or is it for the glory of God? Can you receive that in your life? Can you believe it? Can you turn the negativity of thoughts and blame and guilt and say, this is for God's glory? And I will proclaim His name now and forevermore. Because God is God. And He loves me. And He desires only good that come out of this. It's all for His glory. Would you bow with me for a moment? Spend a few minutes, if you will, just thinking, meditating on those things that you blamed God for and, yes, even cursed. And would you give Him the glory, saying, God, turn this to your glory. Help me to see as Jesus is light.